Amie Shaw is going to be talking to us about employability for career success. This is actually a delayed seminar from a few weeks ago, and I'd like to thank Amie for sort of being flexible enough to do this, at another time. Yes, Toby, I'm here, mate. Unfortunately, we were doing sort of COVID stuff and return to sustainability stuff at that stage. So thanks very much for delaying it. I know we had lots of people interested in attending last time, and it looks like we've got lots of interest in the topic again. Amie will talk for sort of a period of time, and we'll have question and answer afterwards, which Chantal and I will facilitate. So without further ado, I'll pass it. Oh, sorry, I should mention this session's being recorded. So just in case you're asking questions, be gentle. And I'll pass over to Amie. Thanks, Amie.
Thanks, Peter, and welcome everyone, and thank you for attending the seminar. So this is a great opportunity to sort of present some of my findings from my ASP that I was lucky to have at the start of the year. So today I'm going to talk a bit about the research building employability for career success. And I looked specifically at the perceptions of women professionals. I know that Chantal has sent out the bio, but I just really wanted to, I guess, provide a brief background into how some of this research came about. Previously, I've been involved in employability from a graduate point of view, from the development of the large first-year course, Work and Employability. And then on the other side, in terms of discipline research, I've looked at human resource management, more in learning and development of individuals, particularly looking at disability workers and also First People. And a focus of some of that learning and development has been around social capital, social exchange theory, and particularly that element of social capital comes, very strongly through in terms of employability. So when I started my ASP at the start of the year, I was a little bit uncertain in terms of what sort of direction some of the research would take me. And so Ruth said to me to do a little bit of, that's our head of department, a little bit of soul searching in terms of that next area. And I really wanted to sort of bridge the gap, I guess, a bit between employability from a graduate point of view and also bring that through looking at it more from a human resource management point of view. And then the other side of it was being a middle-aged professional female, if you like, and having various conversations with friends and colleagues around some of the challenges that we experience in terms of employability and in terms of careers, in terms of that the juggle or between work and family life. This is sort of what led me into looking at this space. So again, looking at employability and how that influences career success of women professionals, but more specifically using a competency-based approach, which I'll talk a bit more about throughout the presentation today. So we know that there's been, a lot of changes globally, rapidly changing environment that we're working on, and that's only been exaggerated, particularly as a result of what's happened this year with COVID-19. Careers, of course, have become a lot more dynamic, and they're definitely losing that level of predictability in terms of where they may lead. And again, I think that's only sort of increased, particularly this year. Not only are individuals needing that constantly flexible attitude in terms of updating their skills, but it's also really important to be continuously watching and looking and seeing what's happening in the labour market. I mean, of course, both within Australia and also from a global point of view. So we're needing to be a lot more proactive when it comes to managing our own careers. And I think this is particularly important for women, not just because of the increased growth in terms of females in the labour market, but also because women's careers tend to be very discontinuous. And that was definitely something I found throughout the research in terms of various breaks and intervals, in terms of having a family often. They're often very dynamic and agile, and of course, a main factor is that they're based on contextual elements, not always, so those non-work elements that I'll talk a bit throughout this presentation today. I should note, in terms of employability, and even sort of the way I normally talk about this in the large first year courses, just to make it clear that it's not just about employment and finding a job. It's about having a satisfying career and also, most importantly, having a successful career, which definitely also comes through in this research. So employability has received a large amount of attention from policymakers, academics, and also practitioners, and it has definitely been a little bit of a buzzword over the last few years. So there's a diverse range of interpretations, which makes it a little bit difficult in terms of finding and defining what employability is. Different disciplines in terms of whether it be education, psychology, it's obviously in career theory, as well as in human resource management. And there's a number of debates, particularly in human resource management, which I'll talk briefly about too. So it's quite difficult to have that sort of standard, stock standard definition because of the different perspectives and conceptualizations of this concept. I'm looking at it more from this research from an individual point of view. So there are other areas in terms of from an organisational point of view where, and I'm also looking at other aspects of research from a human resource management point of view. And that becomes a little bit difficult purely because when we look at employability, it does mean that is more driven by the individual. So again, in terms of how much responsibility human resource managers may take, and that could be likened a little bit to career development, there has been a lot of debate in terms of whether human resource managers should take on that responsibility when in essence employability means that individual may expand those career prospects and employment external to the organisation. And then, of course, from an educational government point of view, and again, particularly in the graduate space, when we look at the education side of things. So focusing more on an individual employability perspective, we often see three main approaches. So one is the competence approach, which we see some of the founding research of Van der Huygen, more focusing on the skills and abilities, which is also the focus of this research. We also see a dispositional perspective, which is from the likes of Fugate and Kanicki, obviously focusing more on personality traits, and again, focusing on what the individual already possesses as the focus of that perspective. Then we've also got the perceived employability perspective in terms of the perceptions of what types of opportunities are available for individuals, and Andrew Rothwell's a founding sort of researcher in that space. We do find, particularly when we look at individual employability, and particularly from a competence point of view, that there are definitely those common themes. So looking at how do we acquire, maintain and use those competencies to cope with some of the changes that are occurring in the labour market. So when we look at the traditional idea of career development, we definitely are seeing that the responsibility now lies more with the individuals than with the employers for some of the reasons I've recently talked about. So as a result of that, when we look at career theory, a lot of it comes down to, okay, well, how do we now build that resilience so that individuals can have that satisfying, successful career? And also one of the main areas with that resilience is aligning your values and your needs and abilities to your career and or your profession. Also, there's been a focus, and I think really important, to look at the practical activities. So the different interventions, the strategies that also can be developed in order for individuals to sustain, develop that employability and also achieve career success. And again, it was that sort of, I guess, key aspect that I really wanted to sort of look at research that was going to be useful, relevant, particularly to female professionals in terms of, okay, well, what things can I do to enhance my employability and career success? And we're seeing employability activities such as professional development, being proactive in terms of developing your own knowledge, competencies, and again, not so much relying on what the organisation has to offer or HR, but actually a lot of individuals, going off and doing sort of different things to enhance those competencies. So while there's a lot of research that looks at the antecedents of career success, there's not so much between the link between employability and career success. And of course, there's even less when it comes to looking particularly at female professionals. And what I think is most interesting when we start looking at women or female professionals is in terms of how we as women define what is a successful career. And often that is done in a more of a subjective manner. It's often very multifaceted because we're not often just looking at what we're doing at work in terms of perhaps the financial outcome that we're achieving, or perhaps our levels or our roles or our responsibilities, but we are looking at the interactions beyond the workplace in terms of what's happening in our family and in our personal life. So there are three main sort of studies that focus particularly on the subjective career success of females. So you can see those on the slides there. So again, there's been outcomes in terms of Travick and Richardson that found that subjective career success was influenced by motivation, females' ability to resolve conflict. We've seen in South Africa that in terms of work centrality, in terms of how important that nature of work versus perhaps external factors and non-work family factors, whether it be motivational expectancy in terms of what rewards are you getting for various effort behaviour that females are putting in, as well as things like self-efficacy, so your that self-belief or the level of confidence that you have in terms of your capabilities to actually do the job, which again comes quite strongly through in this research. And then there was a really interesting study done in Australia. So it was females in the resource sector, so obviously quite a niche area, by Teo Lord and Nowak, who looked at the fact that networking, participation in professional development activities also influence subjective career success, and some of that had also come through in this study. What I've also found too, when we're looking at some of these studies, is that often females' specific career paths have been focused on. So, for example, it might be that it's just females in academia or females in engineering. So what I tried to do with this research was to use a diverse amount of female professionals, so not sort of constrained, if you like, to one area or one profession, to see what was happening more from a wider sort of point of view. And I was looking at in terms of the theoretical framework for this study, again, so just to reiterate, I was looking at more of an individual perspective. So I was really interested to see, what are the skills, the competencies needed for individuals. Again, definitely, I think important from a practical point of view. So again, looking at the competency-based in terms of the skills, abilities needed to sort of find job opportunities, but also to, progress and develop in terms of careers. The competency-based approach, I think, is really important because you are, again, like I mentioned, looking at activities and interventions and strategies that it can actually be harnessed by individuals. Strategies that can be used to manage, obviously, and take advantage of opportunities, but also how we can sort of combat some of the challenges that occur, particularly for developing employability and career success. So Lowe, Presti and Pluviano's theoretical framework was particularly intriguing to me. A fairly recent sort of framework on employability. It was also one of the few that sort of incorporates sort of social capital. So there's obviously different models that include obviously different factors. This was one that included a number of aspects that have been used in other studies, but not all together. And again, there was also that social capital element, which I think is very important to employability. So career identity and self-management, a lot of that's all about the awareness of your own professional experience, the ability to make sense of obviously what you've done, and then obviously project that moving forward. But most importantly, when it comes to that identity and self-management, is the fact that we're looking at not just those work contexts. So we're looking beyond work, balancing your career and also your family goals. When we look at human capital and professional development, of course, we are looking at the efforts made by individuals to develop the new knowledge and abilities, and how we can also use professional development activities to also improve the human capital. When we're looking at social capital, we're looking at the attitudes and behaviours that we might use to improve our social relationships. And of course, that's both internal to the organisation through our colleagues, our supervisors, as well as outside through being able to, engage with other professionals, involved in coaching type situations and so forth. And then obviously within that social capital is the actual networking behaviours and activities that come into play. And the last area was looking at environmental monitoring, the awareness of the actual external context. And again, there's some models that, like I said, with social capital, they may not include looking at the external environment. So this was a model to me that included important elements, both sort of internal, but did not sort of forget the importance of identifying the different dynamics that are occurring in the labour market. Again, identifying both the opportunities as well as the barriers, and how we might sort of deal with that, what strategies might we need to cope with some of those changes. So Hogan 2013 is probably one of the few theoretical models that actually link employability to career success, unlike as well as the Presti and Pluviano's model. However, Hogan does focus on objective career success, which is something different that I wanted to look more at the subjective side of things. So they focus more on that occupational prestige and also that financial attainment, where I wanted to look more at those non-work factors, the family, the relational aspects in terms of what constitutes that successful career, if you like. So this is just the model from Presti and Pluviano's 2016 model. So obviously I'm looking more at the employability orientation, employability activities, and how they feed more to those proximal outcomes, particularly looking at the internal career success or the subjective career success. And I've got some sort of, future research ideas that help to look at other sort of aspects of this model moving forward. So what I did in terms of the method of this research is that I'm a qualitative researcher, so I use a qualitative case study methodology. It included 24 semi-structured interviews, approximately 45 minutes to somewhere up to an hour and 15 minutes. These were all conducted online because this is when we were all in lockdown at the start of the year. They're professional females aged between 40 and 65. And like I mentioned, I really wanted to use a diverse range of females, so I didn't want to sort of just look at one profession in terms of academics, in terms of perhaps people in certain industries. So there was sort of a wide variety of industries that were used across these interviews. So the interview questions started off talking about sort of your basic sort of demographics, family responsibilities, and we actually sort of tracked back, to almost the start of their career and went through the different challenges where the individuals had various sort of breaks in their career, perhaps due to family. So I've got a lot of extra sort of data that probably hasn't also come through, particularly with this presentation that I hope to use moving forward. But I was really interested in finding out some of the various factors, so both personal, because I think that's really important because that definitely sort of frames who we are and also definitely influences our career, and also those professional aspects that influence employability. So I guess in a nutshell, I was looking at the skills, the knowledge, the attitudes, but also those networks and how they've sort of enabled or enhanced their ideas of career success. I also was really interested, again, from a practical point of view, to sort of see what these professional females, what advice they would give in terms of enhancing those aspects. And again, that's sort of come through, of course, in the data. So this method, I did use a non-probability, non-random, purposeful sampling technique. So I did use my LinkedIn profile networks to recruit participants for this study. As a qualitative researcher, I really enjoy the manual coding analysis. So I always start off with a manual analysis before I sort of run it through the in vivo sort of software, just to sort of identify sort of what sort of themes may be coming through from the data. And these are some of the things I've found. So I really wanted to sort of include a few of the quotes. Happy for Chantel as well to distribute these sort of PowerPoints if people want to sort of have a bit of a closer look. I get that there's a lot of information on these slides. But there are four main themes, and I'll talk a little bit about each of them. So the career identity and self-management. A lot of that came down to the work-life balance. Being able to balance work and family life was a significant aspect for female professionals. And all participants basically said it was difficult to balance the work and family life. It was difficult to separate both family from work. There's quotes in terms that relate to how they're intertwined and they overflow to one another. And that made that self-management quite difficult because it was so intertwined. The career insight and awareness, a lot of that came down to the importance of having an alignment between your own values and what you're doing in your profession, and that also comes through in a couple of the quotes there. So being value-driven and also the significance of having that alignment definitely had a positive impact on individuals' careers and also their career success. Career self-efficacy, having the confidence and the faith that you have in yourselves was really important to employability. There were a couple of participants that thought it was the actual competence or capability that would perhaps come through in your performance review and perhaps demonstrated in your roles or promotions. So it wasn't just about that self-belief, it was the actual performance. But there were a number of participants that also said that when they did lack confidence in themselves, then that really did impede their career success. And then there was career forward planning. So this is where the proactive nature comes into play in terms of thinking forward about what you might want to do in your career. Again, help to sort of navigate and make sort of decisions that are right for you. And again, that comes through again and your confidence, having a sense of what your values are. I guess that also comes down to sort of what your strengths are, identifying weaknesses and so forth as you're sort of navigating through your career. Theme 2 was all about the human capital and professional development. And obviously these, although aligning closely to the theoretical models themes, obviously there were sub-themes that sort of came through that were a little bit different to what the model discusses. So all participants were very sort of clear that, you definitely had to have that expertise in terms of being able to be employable and also have a successful career. And that expertise was then translated to having a high level of credibility and perhaps visibility within the organisation, which would then lead to career development, both internal and external to the organisation. A lot of participants also talked about that desire or that hunger to learn, and that it was also about the continuous development of your skills. And again, it wasn't just from a professional point of view. A lot of information was talked about it in terms of developing yourself from a personal point of view, and then how that would translate through as well as a professional career. Learning awareness was really important in terms of being able to identify your own skill gaps. So knowing what your strengths are, knowing what your weaknesses are, importantly, what can you do to then perhaps upskill or transfer some of those weaknesses or change those weaknesses to a strength, or perhaps consider them as more of an opportunity. And also thinking back, learning from mistakes as you sort of progress through your career. Then there was the social capital and networking. So there was first the social relational competencies. So most participants talked about the fact that it was actually their outgoing personality, which starts to cross in a little bit to some of the dispositional aspects of employability, that helped them to manage their social relationships. Again, both internal to the organisations in terms of how they worked and developed those relationships with colleagues, but also external. What I thought was really important, particularly since we're looking at women professionals, was the social support and how that influenced individuals. Again, critical for a lot of female professionals to have those support networks in terms of that aiding them throughout their career. So that may be support through talking to work colleagues and having that support at work, but it was also really important from an external point of view in terms of having family and friends, might be support in terms of caring responsibilities that assisted them to enable them throughout their career. And all participants mentioned how important they thought networking was, and also went on to mention various strategies such as the LinkedIn professional networking system, and how that had aided in terms of finding new job opportunities and increasing elements of their employability and success in that respect. And the last theme was the environmental monitoring, and this really had probably the one theme that had some mixed results. So while some participants sort of acknowledged that, yes, they were being very proactive and constantly monitoring what was happening in the environment, in the market, the labour market, there were a number of participants too who believed that it wasn't so important, that their reputation and their expertise spoke for itself, so to speak. So that was what really enabled their employability and career success. And also through their existing networks, that is where some of the opportunities came from. So not necessarily being active and looking in the labour market for new opportunities. So there was a little bit of a mix in terms of those results. So I've just put this illustration together just to sort of break it down a little bit simply in terms of the four themes and also some of the sub-themes. But the employability-based competencies really came down to that alignment of values in your career, being able to build that sense of self-efficacy in terms of that confidence in your capability of what you do, definitely comes through really strongly. Being proactive, so taking individual responsibility for your career, in terms of various personal development opportunities that you can engage in order to enhance those elements of employability and success. Being able to constantly learn and develop, again, both personally and professionally, and also being able to develop those social relationships through, some form of networking. One of the main barriers, of course, was that constant juggle for women to feel that they, were trying to sort of manage their work and family life, and how they were able to do that. So that was sort of one of the main aspects that sort of created, I guess, a barrier or perhaps a challenge for some when it came to employability and career success. In terms of some of the implications, so the aim for this research was to build a little bit more in terms of women and employability, and looking a little bit more deeply in terms of how these employability dimensions impact on the success of female professionals. Presti and Pluviano's model is obviously fairly new, 2016, so the idea too was to start to provide some qualitative empirical support for this model, But I guess most importantly was to start to provide more of a practical, these practical implications in terms of how organisations and practitioners can support females in terms of being able to develop some of these competencies. And we definitely see, there was some individuals where were very much supported in terms of professional development type opportunities. There were various networking type initiatives available. There were some of the females that definitely had additional support in their organisations when it came to caring responsibilities, when it came to sort of having flexible work hours and being able to better manage some of the challenges that occur between the work and family life balance. So it just sort of provides a little bit more exposure in terms of what females are needing in order to ensure those positive outcomes. And again, I guess the main driver for the research was to start to provide some valuable and practical strategies that females can actually use in terms of enhancing their employability, career development and their success, that we can actually sort of start to, communicate to find sort of different strategies. And that's why it was also really interested, I should say, to sort of talk to these female professionals and find out what sort of strategies they've used, what was helpful, what perhaps, was creating those barriers throughout their career. Of course, the research isn't without limitations. So the research is based on individual perceptions of employability. So I didn't use independent data to confirm these views. So hence the subjective nature of this research. As I mentioned too, this research used a purposeful sampling technique. So I was sort of seeking out participants through my own sort of LinkedIn network. And of course, with the fact that I'm focusing purely on women professionals, this information and this data may not be generalisable, of course, to other groups of individuals. So I've got quite a few ideas with future research. One of the main things I want to look at is I'd like to translate some of this information into a longitudinal research project, following up with the same participants in 2 years. So this was the thought before, obviously, COVID, a little bit before sort of the implications of COVID came about. So I was already keen to sort of follow up and see what some of the changes may have occurred in terms of their employability as they progress further in their career. Were there different strategies, different interventions that might have aided their employability and career success? But of course, as a result now of the implications of COVID, I think it'd be even more interesting to sort of think, how things may have changed as a result. There's also the possibility of exploring different group of individuals. Obviously, I have an avid interest of female professionals, being one myself. There could be the opportunity to perhaps compare different genders and just see what different factors exist, as I'm sure there would be, with a comparison of those genders. Another aspect I'm really interested in is looking, and I have got some data from when I collected in my ASP, is looking at the antecedents of employability. I'm really interested to look at some of the life events, the circumstances, particularly surrounding female professionals, in terms of how that influences their employability. So not so much looking from an outcome point of view. And again, going back to delving, if you like, deeper into their career, the different challenges they've had. As I said, it might be that family work-life balance, and might have had caring responsibilities, and look at how that actually impacts their employability. Questions?
Fabulous answer. Really interesting, an interesting